with a look at the new iPad mini 3. So the iPad mini 3 now gives us 3 iPad minis to pick from. The cheapest is $249, which is the original, with a non-retina display and an A5 processor. So that's the cheapest iPad yet. We also have the iPad mini 2, formerly known as the iPad mini with retina display that launched a year ago. So that's now $100 cheaper at $299. And the iPad mini 3 at $399 is the iPad mini 2 plus Touch ID, a gold color option, some new capacity configurations at 16, 64, and 128 gigs for the same pricing of last year's 16, 32, and 64 gigs, so more bang for your buck. And we have the new Apple SIM, which means you can buy an LTE version of this iPad and select your carrier under settings, instead of having to purchase a specific carrier version of that iPad. So that's very nice. Again, that's also available in the new iPad Air 2. All right, so let's go and crack into our box. And as you can see, the box is very similar to that of the iPad Air 2, with the device in profile showing off the color and the thinness of the device. And inside we'll find our very familiar iPad mini wrapped in plastic, pretty much the same design since the iPad mini launched. Of course, the big differentiator here is Touch ID. So let's go ahead and peel off the plastic and set that aside for just a moment while we clear the contents. So first thing, we'll find our literature packet, which includes a quick start guide, some regulatory and warranty information, as well as some Apple stickers. Now behind that, we'll find the standard USB to Lightning connector for charging and syncing. And just like the iPad Air 2, we'll find a 10-watt power adapter for charging our device. All right, so let's go and boot up our iPad mini 3 for the first time so we can take a close look around. Now, of course, with Touch ID, you're prompted at setup to set up one of your fingers for Touch ID. The process is pretty familiar, so if you're used to an iPhone that uses this, it's the exact same process. Now, you can set up one finger here and set up more fingers later. So with Touch ID, you can use this for Apple Pay, so you can make purchases with cards that support Apple Pay, and you can use it for purchasing iTunes content. And of course, this iPad does not have NFC, so you can't just take this to a NFC terminal to make a payment like you can with an iPhone. So once again, we have a 7.9-inch LCD IPS panel with a resolution of 2048 by 1536, good for 326 ppi, and that's the same ppi on the iPhones. Up top, we have a FaceTime HD camera, 1.2 megapixels, good for 720p HD video with an ambient light sensor right next to it. Of course, down below, the home button now integrates Touch ID. So you have a sapphire lens covering the Touch ID sensor with a metal ring which acts as a capacitive trigger for the feature. Now along the upper right corner, you'll find your volume controls along with the physical switch. That switch can be configured for either mute or rotation lock. On the top, we'll find our power button. Toward the center, we'll find a set of dual microphones, one facing toward the back, one facing toward the edge, and then we have our headphone jack in the same location. Now on the back, we'll find a 5 megapixel iSight camera, which again is carried over, same sensor, same optics. But you can see there's one slight design change from the iPad mini 2. You can see there was a ring surrounding the lens. This time, the lens is all glass, but the optics and the camera are still the same. And finally, at the bottom, we'll find our Lightning connector and a set of stereo speakers. Now the software features of the iPad mini 2 and mini 3 are identical. So the only difference here is under settings. So under settings with the new iPad mini 3, you'll find controls for Touch ID. So this is where you can rename fingers, add new fingers, delete them. And then you have Control Center for Passbook and Apple Pay. So with Apple Pay, of course, you can add additional cards, change permissions, add information, and more. Now, if you take a look at our Geekbench scores, again, you can see both tablets perform about the same. That's to be expected because they both have the same A7 chip, a dual-core clocked at 1.3 gigahertz with 1 gig of RAM. Now, if you compare this to the iPad Air 2, which has a new A8X chip, which is a triple-core processor clocked at 1.5 gigahertz with 2 gigs of RAM, the multi-core score on here is hugely different. So 4518 versus 2482, so definitely a lot more processing power here. And then the single-core score is also much higher, 1817 versus 1376. Again, 1.5 gigahertz versus 1.3. Now last year, the iPad Air and iPad mini were basically the same tablet, same specs and that sort of thing. They were just scaled in size. But this year, the iPad Air 2 has moved on and the iPad mini has stayed basically the same. So now there's a bigger gulf between them. So let's talk about the differences. So the big difference here is on the front. So on the iPad Air 2, they've optically bonded the display to the glass, so now there is no air gap, which improves the quality of the display. There's also a new anti-reflective coating on the iPad Air 2, which the iPad mini does not get. We also have a new FaceTime HD camera on the iPad Air 2, which is picked up from the iPhone 6, which is a much better camera with a wider aperture and a new sensor. On the side, we'll find the volume controls, which have been redesigned on the iPad Air 2, which picks up on the design of the iPhone 6, but the iPad Air 2 has eliminated that physical switch, so if you like it, at least it's still here on the iPad mini. They've also relocated the dual microphones so you don't accidentally cover them up when you handle your iPad. Toward the bottom, we'll find our redesigned stereo speakers, which again pick up on the design of the iPhone, and they do sound quite a bit louder on the iPad Air 2 versus the original iPad Air. And on the back, we'll find a new 8 megapixel instead of 5 megapixel iSight camera, which has improved optics, an improved sensor, and features like 120 frames per second slow motion. And of course, the new iPad Air 2 is much thinner than the iPad mini. That's thanks to new technologies like the A8X chip, which is more battery efficient, so they were able to slim down the battery, and the new display assembly, which is much thinner. Unfortunately, without those technologies, the iPad mini has to retain its thicker form factor. Now, the iPad Air 2 Touch ID is also noticeably faster than that on the iPad mini 3, at least when you compare them side by side. So in the end, I think the big story here is the iPad mini 2 more than the iPad mini 3. iPad mini 2 is now a great deal at $299 for an excellent compact tablet with some impressive capabilities. But to choose an iPad mini 3, you really have to want Touch ID, a gold color option, or more capacity configurations, which I think is going to be a bigger deal here because you're stuck at 32 gigs at best with the iPad mini 2. For a lot of people, that may not be enough, so they're going to be forced into the iPad mini 3. But of course, Touch ID comes with a lot of convenience, so that may be valuable to a lot of people. So I'm curious what you guys think of the iPad mini 3. Please sound off in the comment section below and let me know if you think it's worth the $100 over the iPad mini 2. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.